Hi guys, welcome yet again to yet another home range poultry video. Now today's video is basically a follow-up of one of the major videos that we've done on feed formulation. And on today's video I just want to discuss and show you the exact ingredient that we actually use and what is the purpose of each one of those single ingredients. So if you've not watched the other video to do with the feed formulation and the process for actually making the feeds, I would encourage you to go back and have a look at that video. Now on today's video I want to discuss all the elements that you're seeing in front of me. Now all these are the various elements that we actually put into the feeds. And of course, when you get the feed formulation, which you usually share during the training days, it's actually able to tell you how each one of these ingredients is supposed to be measured and at what quantity when you're making the various type of feeds. Now the three main type of feeds that you actually make from these ingredients that are before me are chick mash. Chick mash is what we feed to the chicks from when they are day old all the way to when they get to around 2 months of age. And then there's a grower's mash, which we usually feed our birds from when they are about 2 months of age all the way to when they get to around 4.5 months. And then finally there's the layers mash, and the layers mash is what we feed the chicken from when they are about 4.5 months moving forward. Now to start us off, I've arranged these ingredients based on the categories of carbohydrates, there's the proteins, and there's the mineral elements, and of course at the corner there is what you usually call the additives. Now I will start my discussions by going through each and every single one of these ingredients individually so that you understand what it is for and basically why it is important for you to include it in the feed. So to start us off, let's go to the extreme corner up here. Here's an element that is called maize germ. Maize germ is basically derived from byproduct of maize. Now this is usually a waste product that is derived once the maize meal is actually being produced or the maize flour is being manufactured. So being a waste from maize, we usually don't throw it away. We usually come and use it to formulate our feeds. It's a fantastic source of carbohydrates for your chicken. And the beauty about the maize germ is that it actually comes from one of the most nutritious part of the maize, which is the hard innermost part. So by using maize germ, you're actually giving your chicken a very good quality kind of carbohydrates. The second ingredient, of course, is the maize itself. Now, as you can see inside here, you can see the maize itself, the solid maize. I don't know whether you can see it. Yes, the maize grain itself. However, when you're formulating feeds or making feeds, we usually do not use maize in its solid or grain form. We actually have to mill it down. And we usually mill it based on how fine you want the maize to get. If you're making something like chick mash and you want it to really become very, very fine, of course you have to go ahead and mill it maybe a couple of times, 2 or 3 times. But like for this particular case, as you can see, you can still see some full maize grain. And because this maize has been milled down to be able to make a layers mash, because layers mash you do not need the maize to be so fine. So here we have the maize which has already been milled as indicated there. So that's the second carbohydrates that we actually use for our feeds. The third are basically byproducts from making wheat flour or from the wheat grain. So the first byproduct here that you're seeing here is something that we call the wheat bran. Now here is wheat bran. Okay. Now wheat bran is basically derived from the husks of the wheat grain, which are removed when wheat flour is being made. So they are very light, as you can see, they are very light. It's basically the husks themselves, but they are extremely important part of feed formulation. So we'll use some wheat bran. Now we also come and use this that looks very fine. As you can see, it looks very fine. It's almost like flour actually. And this is an element that you get from a byproduct again of wheat, and it's actually a waste product when wheat flour is actually being made or processed. And this ingredient is something that we call the wheat pollard. Pollard is a fantastic source of carbohydrates for your chicken, and the best part about it is that the prices for most of these ingredients are actually pretty low because they actually waste product from other processes. So you find that their prices are usually very stable, and the supply is also constant. They don't really go out of supply. And for that reason, the 4 elements which are just before you right now are all the elements that we actually use for making feed, and these are the carbohydrate sources. So we have the maize itself, the milled maize, the maize germ, the wheat bran, and the pollen. So these are the 4 main carbohydrate sources that we use for formulating our feeds. Now the second category, which is very critical, are the protein sources. Now protein is basically what your chicken requires to be able to form the muscle and the tissue and basically the meat. Okay, so of course the carbohydrates are for energy, and the proteins are basically what converts to become the meat, because protein in your body is used to make the tissue. So in this particular case, I'll start here. This is an element that we call soya meal. Sorry, this is an element that we call soya meal. It is not soya, it is soya meal. Those two are very different. Now soya meal again is derived from soya beans, okay, and they have to undergo quite a rigorous process of making sure that you defatten them, you remove the fat, you also remove the excess moisture, so that you're actually able, and of course you grind it down so that it's easily palatable for the chicken. And as you can see, it's really dry. I mean, it's quite dry. It's not fatty or anything like that. So this is soya meal. Soya meal is a fantastic source of protein for your chicken. The only downside of soya is the fact that, you know, it's also used for human consumption. So you find that a lot of times you may actually find the availability may be a problem, and of course once supply becomes a problem, the pricing also becomes goes up. But the beauty about soya is that you do not use so much of it in the feed. So as much as it may be expensive, you use a very small amount of it, and of course that's one of the ways that the cost of the feed is actually reduced. So we have soya as a protein source. Next here we have an element that is called the cottonseed cake. Now cottonseed cake is derived from cotton seeds. Now once cotton seeds are harvested and they are pressed to remove the cotton oil, which is used in a totally different industry, we are left with a solid cake, and the cake usually looks something hard like this, okay, something really hard, okay, but of course much bigger than this. So it's a huge rock. So obviously we can't be able to use that cotton seed cake when it's a rock like this. So what you generally have to do is that you have to take this cake through a mill, grind it down for us to have something much finer, which is this now what you're seeing, the cotton seed cake. So we don't use the cake when it is in its solid form like this, because this will not be easily palatable. It will also be too big. So we have to use a small mill or grinder, which will now break it down into a much finer powder, and you can actually be able to use it in your feed formulation. So this second protein source is something that is called cotton seed cake. The beauty about cotton seed cake, again, it's not used for human consumption, so the prices are pretty stable, and it's of course also easily available. The third element that we use as a protein source is what you're seeing here, called the sunflower seed cake. Now sunflower seed cake is again derived from sunflower seeds, which have been ground down and pressed to remove all the sunflower oil, which again is used for, you know, human consumption and for other different industries. Now once you're left with the solid cake, after pressing out the oil from the sunflower seeds, that cake is actually usually dried and then it's ground down to form this, which is the sunflower seed cake. So sunflower seed cake, yet again, because it's not used for human consumption, the prices are usually pretty stable and also very easily available, and it's a fantastic source of protein, of course, for your chicken. So finally here, most people, whenever they are formulating poultry feeds, they like to use something that is called omena. Now omena, of course, those small tiny fishes that are derived from the lake. Now the problem with omena is that, number one, it leaves a fishy taste in your chicken. So if your chicken consumes a lot of omena, it starts altering the taste of the chicken. And then of course the price. Since omena is used for human consumption, you find that the prices often are usually very high. So what is actually a fantastic and even a much better option than the omenas is this element that is called ochonga. Now what I love most about ochonga is that if you check inside, you should still be able to see the omenas, the tiny fishes. Can you see them? Can you see them? Can you see it? I'm sure you can see it. Yes, there. So you have the omenas, the tiny fishes. Okay, these ones. So that's omena. Okay, all this is omena. You can also see the one that is down here. Sorry, not that one. Yes, you can see all these omenas inside. But apart from omena, you're seeing these shells. Okay, these crustaceans, fantastic source of minerals. for your chicken. And finally, if you look very, very closely and keenly, you will find that there are these tiny shrimps. Very, very tiny shrimps. Can you see that? Yes, you can. Those tiny shrimps. So ochonga is not only composed of just purely omena. It contains omena, it contains the crustaceans, the shells, and it still contains those tiny shrimps. And that's the reason why ochonga is a much better source of protein for your chicken than omena. And the beauty about these is that because each one of the elements is in very small quantities or concentrations, you find that it does not alter the final taste of the chicken. So I would strongly encourage you to find ochonga. It's a fantastic source of protein for your chicken. And the beauty about it is that because ochonga is not used for human consumption at all, the prices are usually pretty low. So one of the things that you also look at when you're sourcing for ingredients, the ingredient has to be both quality but affordable, so that you make sure that the feed cost is not so high. So we encourage people to use ochonga, okay, instead of using omena for your feeds. So there you go, the protein sources. Again, I will repeat, you have the ochonga, you have the sunflower seed cake, you have the cottonseed cake, and finally you have the soya meal. So all these four elements are what consists of the protein element when you're formulating our feeds. Next, let's go to the mineral sources. Now, minerals are extremely important to chicken because is what contributes to the the bone formation, the feather formation, the scales, the beak. All those elements you actually require minerals. So for our minerals, there are four main elements actually that we use, and one of them is the first one that is here. Is what you're seeing here, limestone. Yes, just the normal plain limestone that is usually found, near the coastal belt. This is just the rock itself that has been ground down. Okay, so it usually looks like a fine, sort of a fine powder. Okay, so this is limestone. Limestone is a fantastic source of minerals for your chicken. The next element we use is this, something very interesting. If you look keenly, these are actually broken down bones. Okay, and these bones basically are what is called bone meal. So this constitutes of various bones from various animals, usually other livestock like goats and cows, that have been dried to remove the excess oil and the fat. And then once they are oil, of course, they're broken down, they're milled down to form the bone meal. Okay, so apart from the limestone, we have bone meal, which is also a very important element. And if you look in on the bone meal, you can see it has quite big chunks. And these chunks are very critical because actually, partly they're also used by the chicken during digestion for grit factor. And grit is very important because grit is actually what helps the chicken be able to grind down the feed, purely because, chicken, unlike human beings, they do not have teeth. So you find that bone meal is very important to add that grit element for the chicken to be able to grind down the feed when it is inside the gizzard. That's where the grinding takes place. Then next, we have the cattle salt. And yes, it is the normal, ordinary salt that cows are given to, which is called cattle salt. Cattle salt is usually pinkish in color, as you can see. But as you can see, it's just salt. Okay, so it's the mineral itself, the cattle salt. Now, when you're formulating animal feeds, we do not use iodized salt or the table salt that we use as human beings, purely because, especially for chicken, they are not able to process iodine in their system. So you find that they find the table salt or the iodized salt is actually poisonous to them. So for that reason, we usually use the cattle salt, which of course does not contain the high levels of iodine. Then finally, we have an element that is called the DCP. DCP is basically the calcium. DCP stands for dicalcium phosphate. Now, as you can see, it's usually just a whitish sort of powder. Okay, usually a whitish sort of powder. But what I love about the feed grade, this kind of DCP that I'm showing you is what we call the feed grade DCP. Now, the feed grade DCP is actually what is used when you're making commercial feeds, and part of the reason is because, as you can see, once I shake it up, it has these huge chunks, which again contribute to provide the grit factor in the feeds. So we don't use the refined DCP, the one that is usually whitish in color. As you can see, this one looks a bit grayish in color, and of course, this particular one is the best to use for feed formulation, purely because it's adding to the grit element. So again, for the minerals, we have the DCP, we have the cattle salt, we have the bone meal, and finally we have the limestone. So these 4 elements are extremely important to provide sufficient minerals for your birds. Now, apart from these usual standard categories of feed, which are the carbohydrates, the proteins, and the minerals, there's also a very important element, which is the vitamins. Vitamins are very important to help the chicken be able to build up its immunity. And for us in the feed industry, of course, when you're making commercial feeds, you can't go using something like vegetables, for formulating your feeds. So what the industry has is an element that is called the premix. So premix usually comes in sort of also a powder, as you can see inside here, sort of a powder. So this premix is what we use. So depending on the type of feed that you're making, you buy the requisite premix. Premix is a very, 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 very important element when you're making your feed formulation, purely because this is actually what provides the vitamin elements that your chicken require when you're making commercial feeds. And you can't skip it, because once you skip premix, it basically means that you're formulating feeds that do not have the vitamin element. And for the feeds to be balanced, they must contain elements from all the various feed nutrition categories, which are carbohydrates, proteins, minerals, and vitamins. Okay, so remember, carbohydrates, proteins, minerals, and most importantly, the vitamins, which comes in the form of the premix. Okay. Now, apart from all these elements, once you put them together, there's an issue that comes up. Your body requires something that are called amino acids. Amino acids are what breaks down the protein that you eat for it to be able to absorb into your body and for it to be able now to form the tissue. So the same thing applies for animal feeds. When you're formulating the feeds, we must add various amino acids to help break down all these proteins for them to be able to be absorbed in the body. And how exactly do we do that? We have 2 main amino acid elements that we use. Number 1 is this, the methionine. So of course some people call it methionine, others call it methionine. To be honest, I don't care what you call it, just know it is called methionine. And as you can see, it's one of the finest powder. Now I should tell you that there's only one major type of methionine that exists, and it is a feed grade. And this is the exact same type of methionine that is also used for most of the elements which are made for human consumption, which are manufactured. So you find that methionine has to be included inside for it to be able to be absorbed into your body as an amino acid to be able to break down the proteins, and for those proteins to be absorbed into your body. So methionine is a very important additive. Now remember, this does not fall into any nutritional category. It is a functional element, and that's the reason why we call it an additive. It is added over and above the usual nutritional elements to help the body be able to utilize the nutritional elements that you've given it. So this is methionine. It's very, very important. The other type of amino acid that we must include is this, what is called the lysine. So lysine is also usually sort of in a granular form. The feed grade lysine is in granular form, as you can see. Okay, so these two, the methionine and the lysine, are a very important additive because they actually constitute the amino acid element, which is extremely important for the feed to be able to, for the protein to be able to be absorbed into the body. Now, apart from these, there are 2 other very critical elements that are used in feed formulation. These are toxin binder is one of them. What exactly is a toxin binder? Now, what a toxin binder does is that you find sometimes, for example, when you're using contaminated ingredients, like for example the maize jam and the maize, and they may contain an aflatoxin, you need to put an additive, which is the toxin binder, that will actually destroy or kill off most of these aflatoxins that may be in some of the elements that you may be using. So toxin binder is a very important element for you to be able to put in feed. And often most people who have skipped putting this toxin binder in feeds go and formulate feeds with all these ingredients, and then eventually the same feeds end up killing the chicken, purely because those feeds may have used elements which contains toxins like aflatoxins, and eventually the chicken die from those aflatoxins, and you could have avoided all that by actually putting in the toxin binder. So in your feed formulation process, never ever miss to put the toxin binder. Toxin binder is also very, very important. It's actually what prevents the buildup of mold in your feeds. Remember, the air itself has moisture. And as you can see, most of these are dry elements, and they are likely to start absorbing the moisture from the environment, and the feed will actually start developing mold. So to prevent that, we actually put the toxin binder in the feeds to be able to help make sure that there is no mold that is going to grow. Finally, we have this element, Now, this is something that is called a coccidiostat. It got rubbed off a bit, but I'm sure you can see. So it's called a coccidiostat. Now, a coccidiostat, as you can see, is just sort of, again, whitish, sort of powdery stuff. Now, what a coccidiostat does is for your birds when they are below the age of 4.5 months, they are very susceptible to a disease that is called coccidiosis, that is brought about by coccidia. Now, you find that coccidiosis is very rampant when the chicken are growing up, because of course your chicken are eating from the floor, and sometimes they are drinking some contaminated water or some dirty water here and there. So because of that kind of environment, you find that you need to put a coccidiostat inside to prevent your chicken from constantly having to deal with coccidiosis. Now, I need to clarify this and tell you this. It is not just because you've used coccidiostat, it means that your chicken will never get the disease. No, they will, because coccidia is one of those disease-causing organisms that is very, very adaptable and changes very easily. So the part of the reason why we use coccidiostat is to reduce those incidences of coccidiosis, but it does not mean that you will not get the disease. You are likely to get the disease, but not in such a serious form. And often, even when the disease outbreak starts for coccidiosis, you find that since your feed already had coccidiostat, you may not get so much mortality. And most importantly, when you administer medication, because once you have a disease like coccidiosis, you must administer medication. Once you administer the medication is actually effective, and the chicken will actually get healed. So this is an extremely important element to add into your feed when you're formulating your feeds. So there, guys, I have shown you each and every single element that you actually use for making the various feeds. Of course, the most important part is to know how much of each element are you supposed to put based on the type of feed that you're making. And that is something that we call the feed formulation. Now, for those people who've already attended the training, you know that you'll always get the feed formulation for you to follow that will tell you how much of each one of these ingredients you're actually going to put when you're formulating the various type of feeds, whether it's chick mash, growers mash, or layers mash. And of course, for those ones who've not attended our training, don't forget, we do one training per month. Every single month, you can always visit our website to see the details for our upcoming training. Just go to www.homerange.com, or you can just send us an SMS to our main pilot line, which is +254 727 200 116. Don't forget, guys, interact with us on all social media platforms. Go to Twitter, go to Facebook, go to Instagram, and just look for Homerange Poultry Farm. And don't forget, guys, we have a very informative YouTube channel. Keep checking out all the other videos. Don't forget to subscribe, guys. And anytime you have a question about feed formulation, about this video, or any of our videos, please post your comment down there and we'll be happy to assist you guys. Why? Because Homerange is working towards profitable poultry farming that you and others can actually be able to make some money out of. So keep watching, guys. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe.